Hello, my friends. In this question and answer session, we dive into everything from branding yourself as an instructional designer to landing freelance clients to building your portfolio website. So we cover a lot of ground. This recording or replay is from last week's live session where people submit questions and voted on the ones they wanted to see answered. So if you would like to attend live events like this and be there live and submit the questions and just be involved with the community in real time, you can join the community by going to devlinpeck.com/ID, and you'll get all of the latest updates about our live events. But let's dive into the session. Also, fair warning, this one was recorded out of a rental we had to stay in because of some work on the house, so that's why the setting is a little bit different. But let's dive right into it. Let's kick off this Instructional Design 2022 question and answer session. So I see the top upvoted comment is from Simran. How do you brand yourself as an instructional designer if you're just starting? How do you brand yourself? So I guess there are a few ways we could take this. I imagine you're not talking about like what logo and font and all of that to use, but I imagine you're speaking more about how do you position yourself. If you're just getting started, I think probably the most important thing you can do is position yourself as a competent instructional designer, right? So one facet of that is learning how to position your past experience as instructional design experience. And a lot of that comes down to the language that you're using. I've yet to find someone or hear about someone's experience that doesn't translate in some way into instructional design experience. There's usually some type of analysis, some type of collaboration, some type of multimedia development. You can almost always find a transferable skill. So just getting comfortable using these instructional design language to talk about your past experience. And maybe an easier way to dive into that is just to talk about like your story. So where are you coming from? Why is instructional design right for you now? And how did your past prepare you well to serve as an instructional designer now? Do you mean like which titles to use? Instructional designer, e-learning developer, learning experience designer, take your pick. I don't suggest using aspiring. If you're in there like learning the tools, creating projects, and doing the actual work to try to land that first full-time role, embrace the title. Don't put it on your resume if you didn't hold that title. But as far as like a LinkedIn headline or how you present yourself to other people, yeah, I'd say embrace that title. Okay, so what are the must-haves that you recommend being in a portfolio? So there's one primary must-have. I call this the flagship project, but it's a project that shows that you can solve a real-world problem with instructional design. Okay, so we're looking for a gap in knowledge or skill that people are facing in the real world, and you identify an appropriate learning solution that can help solve that. So a lot of the flagship projects that you may see people share are these like story-driven, scenario-based e-learning projects. That's what I like helping people with. And I know some of you may have seen that YouTube video that just went live, how to design effective e-learning. That's the process I teach people for creating a flagship project. And that's like the must-have. At least that's what I would recommend. Benefits are that it shows off the full scope of your ID process. You can do the upfront analysis, you can write a storyboard, you can do the visual design, and you can actually develop in a tool like Articulate Storyline, which is the most popular tool in the corporate space right now. So that's a very important skill to have on your portfolio site if you're looking for corporate roles. So that's the must-have. A lot of people are able to land freelance work and full-time roles with a portfolio site and that single project. Okay, but I call the other ones like supporting projects. Like if you want to highlight a specific aspect of your skill set, like I know some people are very interested in the visual design. Other people are very interested in the storyboarding, and they're trying to land some of those roles that are a bit more rare but more instructional design focused. That's a great opportunity for supporting projects. Show off a few pages from a storyboard where you turned like complex technical content into this nice user-friendly storyboard that you can hand off to a developer. Or if you are really into the visual design, maybe design just some mock-ups of slides or like mock-ups of a mobile app as a supporting project. The supporting projects are a way to kind of hone in on a specialization a bit more. Or if you just want to increase your odds at landing a corporate role, good supporting projects are just these short, visually appealing, very well polished, like no error storyline projects. Those are pretty effective on the market right now. What advice do you have for starting out as a freelance instructional designer? Are there any do's/don'ts? Starting out as a freelance ID. So create a portfolio. I don't know if that's already a given, but that was like instrumental in helping me get my freelance business off the ground. I don't think it would have been possible without a portfolio site, because freelancing, it's even more focused on the deliverables, right? People are paying you for your skill set that you've already developed to create deliverables. It's not kind of like a full-time role where someone's like, I'm going to invest in you and we'll help you upskill because like your personality fits with the team. Freelancing, it's like you need to be able to do the work. So get a portfolio site out there. My pipeline in the beginning was via LinkedIn. So keyword optimizing a LinkedIn profile and sending people as early as you can from that LinkedIn profile to your website. You want people to see your work because that's what's going to get them excited about working with you. So those are some do's. I would say the don'ts are, don't underestimate the contract. Don't overlook the contract. You really want to get aligned with your client in the beginning. And you can't always take your client's word for what they're telling you. Like you want to get these things in writing that both parties sign. I saw someone had a question about like my best and worst freelance client experience is. We'll see if that made it onto this Q&A list. But my first year of freelancing for me was rough because, yeah, you can't take people's words. And when you sign some like super legalese contracts, just because you're excited to get the work, but they don't actually outline the deliverables or what the people are paying for, you can get into some tough situations. So some other don'ts: don't just start building the deliverable and storyline and then get feedback on that after you've like built the whole project, because that's going to lead to a lot of rework. So I would say try to have in like some review points, build those in. And if a client is really hesitant to commit to those, that's kind of a red flag. But like, for example, in my client work, I get the text-based storyboard approved. And once that's approved, then I get the interactive prototype approved and then the final product approved. If we're in a later stage and we try to make changes to the storyboard, it's going to incur additional costs, because it can get really tricky with review cycles and feedback coming way too late. So you gotta get comfortable with saying no. So don't be afraid to say no. When you're a freelancer, you need to operate as a business owner, not doing favors for clients to save them money. Customer service is a different story, but if someone's like, oh yeah, can you just like throw in an extra video for me? I've seen some people get taken advantage of pretty bad. And I don't know if that's because of how relationships are with full-time employers, but it's very different in freelancing. Okay, question from Debbie. What is the best way to gain instructional design experience once our portfolios are complete? Is it internships, contracts, or working with a recruiting agency? So Debbie, I'd say that depends on what your goal is. I imagine your goal is not to land an internship. I imagine your goal is to land a full-time instructional design role. So if your portfolio is complete and you're comfortable talking about your past experience and you've optimized your resume, you can land a full-time instructional design role for a company with those pieces in place. You don't need to do an internship in this field. I don't know if there's a misconception that you have to do like contract work before landing a full-time role. That's not the case. But I guess it depends on urgency too, right? Are you trying to land an opportunity as soon as possible and you'll just take whatever you can get to get your foot in the door? Or do you have like between 1 and 3 months to go through these application processes and secure the role you really want? So I would say there's an opportunity cost there. I know some people, it's like, I'm going to get out of my last thing, or I need to start earning some income ASAP. I'll accept whatever I can get. But if you do have a bit more runway, it's probably going to pay off better to try to secure a full-time role if that's your end goal. You don't need to do an internship for a year, 6 months, or anything like that. Okay, a question from James. Have I encountered instructional designers who do freelance instructional design work part-time in addition to other work that they may be doing, such as adjunct college teaching? Is this a realistic potential pathway? Good question, James. And this is a common question. I've had people ask me this before. I mean, it's realistic, right? Like you can do that. If you have a solid portfolio, if you've optimized your LinkedIn profile, you will get leads for people who want you to do freelance instructional design work. Now, the quality of those leads may vary, but I mean, there's so much freelance opportunity out there that you're probably going to land something if you put in the work and you demonstrate that you can do the work, right? There are so many agencies out there who just need hands on deck who can get these things built. Now, if that's your goal, like if you just want 10, 20 hours a week of contract work and you'd be happy with that, maybe you do that for 1 or 2 agencies and you're set. I could see a couple of things happening with that. The first one, I imagine once you start doing the freelance ID work, you're going to realize, I mean, generally speaking, not to make too many assumptions, but I know freelance instructional designers can generally demand a lot more income per hour than adjunct college professors. I know historically, or overall, adjunct college professors aren't exactly paid what they should be paid. So if that's the case, I imagine very quickly you'd be like, why am I doing the adjunct college teaching? I need to take on more clients. And then even if that's not the case, if you're doing adjunct college teaching while you're freelancing, it's going to be quite difficult to manage both, especially if you want to grow your freelance business. Because like I said, there will always be some kind of agencies, like just like the lower value client work where it's like, we just need you to churn this stuff out. Maybe we're paying $50, $60 an hour. So, but if you want to work like directly with clients and like actually build your brand and grow your business, and maybe even start hiring subcontractors of your own and working directly with companies and getting, charging fixed prices and separating yourself from that hourly pricing, adjunct college teaching is going to make that a lot more difficult. Like freelancing it's 2 full-time jobs. I mean, it could be 2 part-time jobs, but it's like actually doing the work and actually growing your business. When transitioning from full-time to freelance, how do you find your first group of clients? You saw in a previous Q&A that I never cold call. Did I apply to contract postings on LinkedIn, etc.? Okay. So Jack, I didn't transition from full-time to freelance, just to make that clear. I mean, growing the freelance business is same type of process though, right? So I started growing my freelance business while I was like doing a master's program and working like a couple of part-time jobs. So I guess between the part-time jobs and the master's program, it added up to a full-time role. But finding my first group of clients, I've told this story before, but maybe I'll tell you again just to give you that perspective. Very first client came from Upwork. I don't recommend using Upwork, and I just got lucky. And it was only like $200, but it was a project that I could use in my portfolio. It was a low risk project for the client, and it was a low risk project for me. It was like a small like micro learning kind of thing, like a 5-minute little e-learning project. But it was good. I got the experience. I was able to pitch like, oh, instead of just making this info based, can we use like an avatar and like add a bit of a story to it? So it was a cool little project I got to put on my portfolio site. My next client, there was someone who I connected with through my master's program who had been a successful consultant for decades, and she was like in the textbook and stuff. So on one of my assignments, I reached out. I was like, "Oh, can I interview you?" It's a standard like master's program assignment, and we connected that way. And then after I finished my portfolio site, I sent it to her, and I was like, "Oh, can you please like review this and let me know if you have any feedback?" And she was like, "Oh yeah, it looks great. Do you do any freelance work?" So that she helped me get my business off the ground, I would say, or just build my confidence. She was like, "Okay, let me know what it's going to cost." And then it was like existential crisis. How am I going to price this? I don't want to insult her if I price too high or if I price too low. So that was tough, figuring out pricing that way. And then from there, which I think is what the most reproducible thing is LinkedIn. So I added that job item on my LinkedIn profile, freelance instructional designer and e-learning developer. On like the first sentence or two of my LinkedIn profile, I was like, "Hi, I'm Devlin Peck, a freelance ID and e-learning developer. Visit my site to see my portfolio," and then link to my website. And I tried to use as many keywords. I mean, it's not keyword stuffing isn't going to work. Like it has to still be human readable, but you do need to be intentional about the words you're using, because people will look up like freelance instructional designer, contract e-learning developer. These are search terms people use on LinkedIn, and you want to show up for those. So like adding like your skills in the skills section. I have an article about this, about how to optimize your LinkedIn profile, but that was the funnel for me for the first year. People would find me on LinkedIn, they would go to my website, see the portfolio and say, oh yeah, this person could do the work. Let's go ahead and then email him or message him on LinkedIn and see if he's interested in taking on the project. And that's the funnel that people who I help get started with freelancing use as well, and it's quite effective. And that being said, you can be proactive about it as well. Like if you have connections who might need your services, and I don't mean connections like, oh, we connected on LinkedIn. I mean like, oh, I've worked for this company for years and I know people there and I know they could benefit from these services. Some people leverage those type of connections, family members who might need your services, and just getting yourself out there and networking, like I did with Kathy, the consultant who I'd worked with early on. I wasn't reaching out to her like, oh, can you hire me? I was reaching out to her like, oh, can you check out my portfolio site? And just letting people know like, yeah, I do take on freelance work. So that can help creating content, sharing your projects on LinkedIn as you add them to your portfolio site. But yeah, cold calling. I experimented with like direct messaging, like maybe once. I sent a DM to like 10 or 15 people. Didn't lead to any work. One led to like a extended funnel where we were like on calls and stuff, and I sent the proposal, but it ultimately resulted in being a waste of time. But yeah, it's best when you have the most leverage when people come to you, right? You have the most leverage when someone's searching for an ID, they're asking their network, do you know any freelancers? They somehow come across your website and they see, oh, this work is great. This is what we need for our company or our business. And then they reach out to you already knowing they want to work for you. It's different than if you're just DMing people, hey, yeah, I'm a freelancer. Can you check out my stuff? So when you have that leverage and people already respect you as like having the expertise that they need, that opens the door to setting more terms, right? So I need 50% up front. Like it's going to be this project price. I don't do hourly pricing. That's getting a bit more advanced. Maybe we won't dive too deep into that, but there's a lot of power in making yourself found where people are looking, as opposed to just putting yourself in people's inbox or on their phone. A lot of us just want to get our foot in the door, but I'm realizing I don't want any job/contract, even entry level. Some job satisfaction is important to me. What are some things we should look for when vetting companies? Okay, Simone, good question. So job satisfaction is important to you. So I guess the question there is, how do you evaluate job satisfaction? Right? If you evaluate job satisfaction, like I want to work 9 to 5, and then at 5 o'clock, I want to clock out and not have to think about this at all. I'd say most ID jobs will probably satisfy that most of the year, right? I think generally when we do surveys and stuff, job satisfaction is like topping the charts in this field. It's part of the reason why I went into this field. I was like, I don't want to be working 60-hour work weeks. And I was like, wow, IDs, they can make a respectable salary while working 40 hours a week. And then I can focus on like my writing or whatever it is afterwards. That's was one of my ideas when I first learned about ID. I'm like, this doesn't seem like such a bad career. But if you mean job satisfaction as in like how rewarding the role will be, that's a bit trickier. And I work with some people like that who they're like, I want to work on mission-oriented projects or for mission-oriented organizations. They don't want to just be like churning out info dump e-learning. We try to help people tailor their portfolios accordingly. So for your flagship project, instead of doing something like, here's how to help a company save money, it's like, here's how I'm solving this social problem. Right? So you can tailor your portfolio for those kind of more socially driven, or like, yeah, you're helping humanity with these projects. If that's what you mean, if that's what's rewarding to you, you can use your portfolio to kind of pursue roles that may be more focused on that. When you have a good portfolio site, it gives you a lot of leverage in the job search. Like when you can demonstrate that you have the skills and you can work on the type of projects that people need people to work on, it gives you more options. You don't have to accept the first thing that comes your way. And that's one of the best routes to a higher salary too, if that's important to you. It's not just, oh, let me apply to this role. I really want this role. Oh, they're not paying what I want them to pay. Let's move on to the next one. Like you go through that process with multiple companies at once, you get 3 or 4 offers, and then you're able to leverage them against one another to to raise the offer, because that's what it's about, right? Like sometimes after you go through an interview process, a company will be like, I want to work with this person. How can we make it work? You have options, right? There's a lot of opportunity in this space. So whatever that means to you, Simone, however you evaluate job satisfaction, it may be a bit trickier to find a role like that, but if you have a little bit of time or a little bit of runway, should be able to find something that checks the right boxes. As far as when vetting companies, probably talking to people who worked for them would be one of the most effective ways to do so, right? Glassdoor, I know, has reviews like that. So that's probably a safe way to vet companies. Probably shouldn't take what the recruiters are saying or what you see in the job description as truth, right? Sometimes those can be out of touch. Job descriptions can be copied and pasted from other companies. So I would say talk to people who have been in roles like that. Look for them on LinkedIn, see what they have to say about it on Glassdoor. Don is asking how to network with recruiters on LinkedIn. Don, I would say the best thing to do there is optimize your profile. Use keywords that you see in these job listings, and the recruiters will find you and they'll reach out to you about opportunities that they want you to fill. I haven't really heard of people reaching out to recruiters. It usually happens the other way around. But if anyone has some perspective on that, feel free to add it to the chat and we'll help out down here. But that's been my philosophy, and it's if you optimize your LinkedIn profile, you're going to see results relatively quickly. But just overall, as like an organic approach, or at least this is the approach I used. I'm not saying it's better than like the direct approach, but when you put in the work up front to optimize your LinkedIn, create content, create a strong portfolio, whatever it is, you put in that work up front, and then the leads will come to you. So instead of you having to wake up and say, okay, I need to message 50 people today, and maybe one of them will be interested in my services or whatever it is, like you want the people reaching out to you who are already interested in your services. Or maybe you don't, maybe you're great at cold outreach, but that was not working for me. That wasn't the style I wanted to use. And the cool thing about this organic approach where you put in the work over time and then people come to you is that it kind of compounds over time. So you might spend a month creating content, you spend 3-6 months creating your portfolio site. You might not see many results in that amount of time, but as you keep doing more and more things, the results will kind of start compounding. Besides Storyline, what is the next software that would be a good focus? So what should we learn after Storyline, essentially? Good question. For me, the program I probably use most often after Storyline was Adobe Illustrator. I really liked working with these like vector graphics, these illustrations. You probably see it's a pretty popular approach in the e-learning space. But if you preferred working with like photorealistic images, right? If you're working in an industry where that seems to be the norm, or that style appeals to you more, and you want to show off that you do that type of work, then Photoshop may be a better tool. But really, it's these image manipulation tools, because that's important for getting the colors you need, making everything look on brand and cohesive, building scenes you need to reinforce like your content. That can help a lot. I imagine some people may recommend learning a video editing tool like Camtasia, Adobe Premiere Pro. Those are valid options. Vyond, I don't know if there are mixed opinions about that, but Vyond, formerly Go Animate, becoming more popular in this space. It's easy to use. It's not like, oh, I need to spend months learning this. It's not like Storyline, but it is a popular tool, growing in popularity. And it is nice because it's easy to make these quick animated videos with that. Matt suggested Camtasia to After Effects to Premiere Pro if you want to dive into the video editing world. Yeah, After Effects is really powerful, but yeah, it does have a bit more of a learning curve. But you can do some really cool things with it, for sure. Someone was told, and I've seen on job listings, that those hiring IDs look for certifications such as those from completed courses from Udemy, ATD, etc. Are these as important as having strong skills and a great portfolio? I'm not sure who told you that, but from people I've talked to, those are not very important. If there are other perspectives of that on the chat, feel free to share them. But we've surveyed hiring managers. I mean, with one caveat, I think the caveat there is it shows that you're committed to your professional development, right? And I could see how some more traditional hiring managers or recruiters are looking for those like just little signals, like, oh, they have a certification, like they must be qualified to do this. I don't think that's very popular. I know that the belief among people like getting into the field, that can be popular, especially coming from teaching, where I know it's very like certification driven and what credentials do you have. But at least in the corporate space, it is very much about what can you do, right? Do you have the skills we need that we can start using on our team immediately? Having a certificate or completing a course doesn't really speak to you having that skill set. Right. I'm sure you all can relate to people who have completed courses, or maybe you've completed courses, but then afterwards it's like you can't actually do anything with the course you completed. You just have it to look nice on your LinkedIn. So I don't know. I don't know if I'm the best person to ask about that. I don't really get it. I don't really get why people would be interested in those things other than to show, oh, I'm committed to my professional development. But yeah, I would say you would see a much, much better return on investment for your time if you spent that time creating actual deliverables. So projects, and even better if you have a whole portfolio site to show off those projects. Yeah, and if you are interested in like higher ed or the government space, I don't think a cert will do a lot for you either, but a master's degree may help you in some spaces in the higher ed or government space. Yeah, as long as you can show off your skills in your portfolio, those other certifications couldn't hurt. But if you have a line, if you have a line item on your portfolio or on your resume with certifications or certificates or whatever it is, and you have like 5 certificates, someone with a good portfolio is going to beat you every single time in the corporate space. Oh, good suggestion from Alex. If you do go for certs or courses, find the ones that follow along projects. Yeah, that couldn't hurt. A cert that does result in a deliverable. I know there are some of those, and that that may be a good option for some people. Good suggestion, Alex. A question from Sarah about the best websites for starting to freelance. I think we've probably already covered that one. My suggestion would be LinkedIn. That's where a lot of people are looking for freelance talent right now. And with a day of work, you can optimize your site pretty well. I don't know if you'll see much results if you do not have a portfolio site. Maybe some people here can speak to that. I mean, if some people might have like years of experience, and I know some people will like reach out to them because of that. But if you are just getting started, and you have like a portfolio combined with that line item on your LinkedIn, freelance instructional designer and e-learning developer. One more thing I'll say about LinkedIn. The connections you have will impact whose search results you appear in. So, for example, if I'm going to go search for freelance instructional designer, the search results are going to prioritize people who are first, second, or third connections to me. Okay, so if I'm not connected to someone in any way via my network, they're not really going to show up in the search results. So what that means is it's important to make connections on LinkedIn, right? If you're going to use LinkedIn to generate business for yourself, I would not recommend being super picky and exclusive with your connections. Not sure if that's controversial. I connected with as many people in this space as I could when I got into this space, and I think that had a big impact on how much traffic my profile was getting. So if you're looking for an actionable tip, make those connections. If someone is creepy to you or spamming you or something like that, the block button is there for a reason. LinkedIn is the way to go. How my progression went is after LinkedIn, I started producing content on my website, and then people were finding me via Google. But some people sustain their business with LinkedIn and word of mouth. Some people just sustain their business with word of mouth, but LinkedIn is just such a powerful tool. We don't want to pass that up. Question from Linda. I would like more strategy around how to integrate learning into the user's daily workflow, not just something they access, complete, and never come back to. What are some strategies, tools, approaches, etc., for keeping content relevant and accessible? So for people who are newer, this is a common frustration. Very frustrating, right? The common approach to corporate learning is let's design some 30 to 60 minute learning experience, send it out to everyone, they complete it, they check a box, and then they move on with their lives, and we never return to it again. Let me know if you don't agree with that perspective, but that's kind of how it goes in the corporate space, and many instructional designers, rightfully so, are frustrated with it. So we know, right? Repetition over time, that's how we help people solidify some of these things that they're learning and actually put them into practice. We know giving people what they need at the point of need, right? Instead of, oh yeah, take this hour-long course about sales, I take the course, okay, great. And then 2 months later, I'm actually out there selling it. You can imagine how much I retain from that. But instead, if I'm about to go out there selling it tomorrow, or I have a sales call scheduled tomorrow, and then I receive an email giving me like an outline for how that conversation can go, you can see how that would be much more effective. So I think email campaigns are email campaigns and automations, I would say. I'm not sure if you've already thought much about that, Linda, but that is what excites me most about delivering learning at the point of need. You can, with a tool called Zapier, Zapier, you can integrate that with most platforms like Salesforce, I'm sure Teams. Most of these tools that people are using in modern companies, you can integrate with them so that when someone does something, like when they schedule a sales call, for example, or when they register for a specific event, you can then trigger an automation in another tool, like a tool like Drip or an email automation tool, and you can send them information that they need. And you can also have filters in there. So like, has this person been in our company for more than 1 year? Is this person's title this? Okay, then let's send them like this resource that they'll need. Strategies, tools, approaches to keeping content relevant. Learning campaigns, I would say. Something to think about. So instead of just, oh yeah, here's an hour-long e-learning course with like all these scenarios that you can go through to practice your sales techniques, imagine if you split those up into 15 different mini scenarios, and every day or every week, we email that person one of those little scenarios. It's a quick thing they can do, and then maybe eventually they'll start looking forward to the next one. So dripping content over time instead of pushing it all at once in a single course, for example. Hopefully I did that question some justice, but that's a good one. Definitely could be worthy of an entire session though. Okay, we have a question from Julie. How many projects should I add to my portfolio? I added 5, but they were created in Canva, not in Articulate, and I have doubts if Canva is good enough to mention. Okay, Julie, I'll give a caveat here. I haven't used Canva. I mean, I've like logged into it and looked at some stuff sometimes, but I haven't really used that tool. I know it can help people who aren't trained in the Adobe suite create some visuals and videos and stuff like, and infographics and all of that look decent. That being said, I think in your portfolio, if your goal is to land a corporate ID role, like you're going to want an Articulate storyline deliverable. Okay, I think that's definitely a safe investment of your time. You can use the free trial. As far as how many projects to add to your portfolio, 3 is a good number to aim for. You can do less, right? 1 really, really good flagship project we've seen time and time again is effective. But yeah, if you have like a scenario-based e-learning project, a job aid, and an animated video or a video you did with Camtasia, that's a solid portfolio. Or if you have, so 3 is a good number. The flagship project I recommend just because it shows off a bit of analysis, design, development, visual design, all of the above, storyline skills, and that opens up some flexibility for your supporting projects for what you want to specialize in further. But yeah, a portfolio with 5 Canva deliverables, probably not going to be as effective as a portfolio with 3 deliverables that use the in-demand tools. All right, question from Julie. Can I place my portfolio projects on my existing website where I also offer other services, trainings, job interview prep, etc., or is it better to place projects separately? Good question, Julie. So I think this comes down to specialization and how you're positioning yourself, right? So just from the information you shared here, job interview prep. So who's coming to your site for that? Well, and we need to think about like how it's positioning you overall. So are we positioning you as someone who's really good at helping people prepare for jobs? Or are we positioning you as someone who's a great instructional designer who can produce results for organizations? The issue with including a lot of different services is that it can make you look less skilled with some of the other services. And this is like speaking generally, like generally it's a good idea to specialize. There may be a way to make all of this come together. Yeah, that's a tough one, Julie. Like it depends on what your goals are. If your whole entire goal is to land freelance ID and e-learning work, might be a good idea to create a separate site for that. But if it's part of your other brand, like if you're doing job interview prep for instructional designers, and if your trainings are ID related, that could build your expertise as an ID, and they can be like mutually beneficial. But if it's like, oh, I'll help people prepare for like teaching jobs, but I also want to do like ID client work, probably two different audiences. You want to have those on two different sites. Hopefully that gives you something to think about. Feel free to message me on LinkedIn or something if you want to follow up on that. Okay, question from Vasundhara. What are the different job profiles? Instructional designer, learning consultant, ID manager. They get confusing. A market picture would be really helpful. Yeah, it can get confusing. There are, of course, a lot of job titles out there. I heard some people talking about this at one of the tables before the session started. Learning consultant. So in organizations where the roles are more specialized, learning consultant is usually on the front end. They're working with the client, they're identifying the need, and they're determining what type of solution will even help solve this problem. So very heavy on the analysis side. In those roles, they would then hand that off to an instructional designer who would say, okay, we know we need this solution. Maybe we'll get more clear on the learning objectives now for this solution. What do we want people to practice doing here? And then maybe they'll go on and either write scripts or write storyboards or write activity ideas, that sort of thing. And then they'll hand that off to an e-learning developer who will say, okay, I have this storyboard. Now I'm actually going to bring it to life in some type of tool to create the final deliverable. Okay. So that's kind of that cycle between learning consultant, ID, e-learning developer. Those roles aren't always so clearly defined. Instructional designer is the one that you'll see with like the most varied responsibilities. Some instructional designers will be the learning consultant, the ID, the e-learning developer, the LMS administrator who's actually like uploading it to the LMS and enrolling people. They do it all. Some IDs will just do the instructional design. They'll do the storyboards like we mentioned. Not super common. And some instructional designers will be actual e-learning developers. They'll be called an instructional designer, but they'll just be handed content and they'll be turning that into videos or e-learning experiences or the like. Okay, so ID manager, I think that one would be pretty clear. You're going to be managing some people. I know some ID managers are also doing hands-on work. I don't have a better answer for you. It is confusing, but the titles in this space are not very clearly defined. And a lot of the time you'll see people making a pitch for a new title. Like it's just kind of messy. It's, you know, you might see like learning experience designer. People are like, this is a different field. This is something different than ID. Yeah. So it's only seems to be getting messier. The best way to figure out what you're actually going to be doing in a role is to speak to the person on the team that you would be working on, or speak to an actual hiring manager who's familiar with that team. The job listing, probably not going to help you as much as it should. And speaking to recruiters, also in my experience, they can't generally speak very well to what you'll actually be doing. And maybe it varies on the recruiter. Okay, when we talk about needs analysis, what are some key parameters we should keep in mind? All right, Simran, I'm not sure what you mean by key parameters, but the main goal of a needs analysis is we want to figure out is learning part of the solution, right? Do we even want to consider creating some type of learning solution to solve this performance problem? That's what we want to figure out when we're doing the needs assessment. Okay, so we might be interviewing people, we might be reviewing some performance data, we may be speaking to the client, stakeholders, we may be observing people doing their jobs, and we want to figure out what's the roadblock here. Is it something environmental? Like, is it some faulty software or some outdated software or some kind of other environmental problems? Or maybe it's the managers who are the problem. And then maybe it's like, okay, maybe a learning solution isn't right for the people we were originally looking at helping improve their performance. Maybe now we need to explore why the managers are doing this thing. Maybe they need some kind of learning intervention. Or maybe it's just like compensation. It's like, oh yeah, these people actually need to be paid more. That's why they don't care about this. So that's the goal of a needs assessment, right? We use those tools available: observation, data analysis, interviewing, surveying, focus groups. But what we're trying to get to the bottom of is what's causing the problem here. Skipping that can be disastrous, because then we're investing hundreds of hours, hundreds of thousands of dollars, countless hours of people who are supposed to be doing the job getting pulled out for training. And then we're right back where we started in the beginning, because A learning solution wasn't even part of the solution to begin with. Okay, another question about branding. How do I brand myself as an instructional designer or LXD person, especially when I'm starting out in the field, but I'm active and learning? I think we answered that one earlier with embracing the title. You are doing the work, you are creating the projects. So yeah, align yourself with the titles that you're most interested in. Instructional designer and learning experience designer, if you want to touch on both of those keywords. Pros and cons of freelancing versus a full-time role. That's a good question, Simone. I have a full YouTube video about that where I dive into it a bit more deeply. The pros for freelancing for me were easy. So the freedom, right? You get geographic freedom. You can work from wherever you want. You can go visit your family, work from there in the evenings if you need to. You can travel the world if you want to, as long as you have internet access and a decent laptop. You can work from bed. You can work from your desk. So you have that kind of freedom, but then you also have freedom over your schedule, right? So if you're like a night owl, you can work at night. If you want to just wake up in the morning and get your work done as soon as you can, and then at 11 a.m. you're free for the rest of the day, on maybe days that aren't so busy, you can do that. So that's why those reasons for me is why, like, coming into this field, that was the vision, right? I want to be able to travel Europe and work from my laptop on my own hours. That was like the dream. And I was like, is this possible in the instructional design space? Like, maybe if I work full time for a couple of years, that's what people are telling me. So that was like what I was grinding towards. And it was possible, and it was amazing. And the other pro there, which I didn't even foresee, is that the ceiling is way higher. So once you get your freelance business like off the ground, and if you do put in that work so that you have like those compounding returns, yeah, you separate, the market sets your value in a way that, like you can charge 25, 30, 50, 80 grand on a project that you can get done in a few months. And obviously it's going to be a lot harder to find a full-time role where you can earn that kind of income. The cons of freelancing, it's hard to get started. It's not hard to get started in the sense, like, again, there's a lot of contract work out there, but not all freelance work is created equally. Okay, so when you're doing subcontracting for an agency and people maybe aren't running the agency super well, they're just like wanting to please the client no matter what, as many review cycles as you need, whatever you want. Like, you need to be able to set boundaries really well in freelancing. And when you're subcontracting for an agency or company who doesn't know how to set those boundaries with their clients, you are going to feel that pain. And that's what a lot of the work may be when you're just getting started. So I try to share my perspective as much as I can and help people avoid those pitfalls and avoid that frustration. But other cons is, like it's not as, you don't know when your next lead is going to reach out to you. You don't know when you're going to land your next project. So things might be going great. You're like, oh, wow, I made more money this month than I've ever made. But is the same going to be true next month and the month after that and the month after that? Am I doing enough things now to make sure that the leads keep coming in? Am I doing good enough work that these people want to work with me again? Like, it's hard. It's harder than I expected it to be. I wouldn't have had it any other way because, like I said, like, full-time is not for me. But yeah, that's probably the biggest con. It's stressful. You need to think about it a lot. If you're supporting a family, I can imagine it would be even scarier. I was getting into it as a master's student, and I had my girlfriend at the time, my wife now, to help me through it when I was doing the full-time student, part-time jobs, and starting a freelance business. But it does get easier over time, especially as you figure out the pricing piece, as you stop taking on like the lower value client work. That's the thing. It pays off exponentially the longer you do it, as long as you're doing the right things. So pros of full-time role, I'm sure other people can speak to that in the chat, but stable income, you have benefits, you don't have to worry about pricing. And generally, it's like once you land a full-time role, like you have the role, you clock out at 5. When you're a freelancer, it's like when you're going to sleep at night, it's like, what do I need to do for my business tomorrow? I mean, I had that problem so bad in the first year. It's like, I should be doing something to grow my business. So it's tough. It's tough, but wouldn't have had it any other way. Mohit's question from the chat box: what steps to follow to create a content outline, especially when the whole content is new to you? So Don, this gets into process, right? Like early on, my process was like what I learned in my master's program. Kind of, it's like, what are the learning objectives? And these are kind of like cognitive knowledge-based objectives, because that's what we can assess in a self-paced e-learning environment. So identify this, recognize the steps of this process, define this term. So I kind of break those down. What is our main learning goal for this experience? What are the main learning objectives? And then can we break those objectives into smaller learning objectives? And those will translate into practice questions, into the assessment questions at the end of a traditional learning experience like this. And if your content doesn't satisfy one of those objectives, you just get rid of them. So that's like the traditional way to do it, I would say. Learning objectives. You can look at Bloom's taxonomy. I have a YouTube video about that. Content outline, though, I'm not sure. Yeah, it's not exactly like writing an essay or something like that, because you'll want your objectives to drive all of the content. But my process evolved. Yeah, I started using the action mapping process pretty early. And there's not much of a content outline on that front either. It's what are the actions we want people to practice? And now how are we going to get them to practice those? By writing, in most cases, in a self-paced e-learning environment, by writing good multiple choice questions, scenario-based questions. All right, but when the content is new to you, it's important to have a subject matter expert on hand, right? So as the instructional designer, in a lot of cases, it's your role to be the learner. Right? You don't have to know the content. You have to be good at extracting that content from an expert. So I just go in with like a blank slate and I'm like, oh yeah, tell me this. What is this? Like, you need to ask a lot of questions. And one of my big questions when I was working with freelance clients is like, is there a subject matter expert available? Because if there's not, if you just want to dump content on me and I have to like sift through it, I don't know if I want to take on that project. And if I do, it's going to probably be more expensive, or it's going to be a lower quality final product. So yeah, it's important to have that expert on hand if you don't have that expertise yourself. And when you do have that expert on hand, don't be afraid to ask questions. You're not expected to know it. I've asked some really dumb questions where people in that field might be like, how is this guy working on this project with us? How much are we paying this freelancer? Like what's PPE? The first time I'm working on a project with like personal protective equipment, you won't know the lingo, and that's okay. Just don't be afraid to ask. Job postings for sales teams, any tips about making that transition? If you're interested in sales type of roles, I mean, you can make a pretty good scenario-based e-learning experience where you're letting salespeople practice like responding to objections or speaking to an aggravated customer or something like that. Like scenario-based sales training makes for a pretty solid portfolio project. So I would suggest doing that. Good question, Don. And we'll finish it off with this question from Himani. How should I select a project? Where can I start? I'm very new to the ID world. So my common recommendation is to draw from a job role that you've held or a job role that your friends or family members hold. And I try to identify performance problems that people face in those roles. So are they making any common mistakes? Are they doing something that's causing problems for the business, causing problems for the customer? Draw on those examples and then ask yourself, okay, is this problem being caused in part by a lack of knowledge or skill? Because that's how you can determine if an ID can help solve that problem. And if they can, if you're like, okay, this is a real world problem, it's caused by a lack of knowledge or skill, I can then go ahead and design a solution so that people can practice doing this right and then help them transfer that to the real world. So that's the approach I suggest for the flagship project. I dive a lot more into detail on that in my How to Design Effective E-Learning video, which is live on YouTube. So check that one out if you haven't seen it. That should help. And I think that will wrap up the Q&A.